KWT slaying.
What if the truth was never lost, only buried? For centuries, historians, scholars, and even colonial records have confirmed what many tried to silence. The original Israelites were a black people scattered across continents but never erased. Their skin was dark, their customs ancient, and their covenant with Yah eternal. This journey uncovers how the Spanish and Portuguese Jews, described as dark-skinned, Semitic, shared one bloodline. Chased by the Inquisition, many fled to Portugal, then beyond, preserving their heritage across borders. But the story doesn't end in Iberia. Across from West Africa, black Jews built synagogues, kept Torah, and passed down the laws of Moses. The Limba in southern Africa, the Igbo in Nigeria, the Beta Israel in Ethiopia, tribes across the continent boldly declared, "We are the children of Israel." These aren't isolated claims. These are voices rising from the dust, connected by oral histories, Torah traditions, and the unbroken rhythm of their identity. No such legacy exists among European Jews. No centuries of tribal witness, no matching traditions, no trace of ancient covenant keeping. Maps, art, and archaeology tell the same story. The Israelites were scattered, enslaved, and displaced, but never lost. The world always knew who they were. Their presence was visible, their customs alive, their story intact. This book doesn't speculate. It confirms the Israelites were black, bound by blood, culture, and covenant to the Most High. This is not just history, it's restoration. The truth was never destroyed, only buried beneath centuries of deception. Get your copy of They Always Knew We Were Israelites today, available now on Amazon.com.
Salama family, salama. How you doing today? Hope you're blessed and highly favored. So if I sound okay, give me a one. Okay, cool. I'm seeing ones. So also, if you haven't done so already, get my book, my new book, The Book of Our Fathers. The Bible is an African book, and it must be read through an African lens. And if you have it already and haven't given me a review, please do so when you can. I'd appreciate it. So we're going to be talking about how Rome took over Jerusalem. And, you know, everyone knows about the sacking of Jerusalem in 70 AD. But how did Rome come into power before the Messiah was born? Right? So this is what we're going to talk about. And I'm going to do a prep work right now. And then I'm going to get to my slide presentation, because there's a few things we need to balance first so that, you know, there won't be any confusion. Okay. So let's do that right quick. All right. All right. So We're going to start with Alexander the Great, right? We need to understand this because all of the things that are happening today is tied to the past. Every prophetic situation, every stronghold, uh, everything that's happening to the world at this point has to do with what happened in the past. There's nothing new under the sun. So we have to understand, and for me, it's like I've always blurred these things, right? I've because I never took the time to look at it. I've always blurred these things. And so we got to understand when Greek control began, right, in 332 BCE. So Alexander the Great, what happened was he defeated Persia and absorbed Jerusalem into his empire. So we remember, that Persia was controlling Jerusalem, right? And so now that we see that, okay, first we had the fall of Babylon. Daniel and them escaped. Then Nehemiah and them went to Jerusalem, right? They were still under Persian control. And so Alexander defeated the Persian Empire and took over Jerusalem. So one thing we don't have, it wasn't a siege like in 70 AD when we had the siege of Jerusalem, right? No dramatic sacking, right? Like we see in 70 AD. It just power changed hands from the Persians, right, to the Greeks. So we have to get that straight because there's a succession of events that occur throughout Scripture that, we don't fully understand. And so after Alexander died, the city passed between these Greek successor states, right? So from 301 to 200 BCE, Jerusalem fell under the Ptolemy kingdom. Now, this is very important, right? The Ptolemies were Greek as well, right? And if you remember, and I'm not going to really discuss it too much here, but if you remember, I talked about the Ptolemies and how they controlled Egypt. And I told you all about the letter of Aretias. Give me a one if you remember the letter of Aretias, right? And the letter of Aretias describes how Jerusalem looked, how the Temple Mount looked, all these things, right? So from 301 to 200 BCE, Jerusalem fell under the Ptolemy kingdom, right? And they ruled Egypt. And they put in this Greek system, this Greek administration, right? So they had this Greek administration, the Greek language in government, right? And Israelite law was still functioning in Jerusalem, but the operating system was Greek administration and Greek language. And we could see that, in the design and development of the Septuagint, because that's the reason, according to the letter of Aretias, that the Ptolemies sent some Jewish scholars and stuff back from Israel, right, to Egypt to work on the Septuagint. So in 200 BCE, control shifted to the Seleucid Empire after the Battle of Panium, right? So the Seleucid rulers pushed aggressively Hellenization. And so this caused rebellion within Israel. And that's when we get the whole story of the Maccabees and we get the story of Antiochus Epiphanes. Y'all should know that, right? If you read Maccabees and stuff like that, right? So 332 BCE, the Greek rule begins under Alexander. 301 to 200 BCE, Greek rule via the Ptolemies. 200 to 167 BCE, Greek rule via the Seleucids. Now, what we're going to find out is what happened after that, right? Because these things give you context of what happened during the time of the Messiah, or how we got up to what we see in the New Testament. Okay, and this is important because we don't know our past, we don't know the history, we are doomed to repeat it. And this is why the Most High says, my people perish for lack of knowledge, because we don't know enough, right? First of all, we didn't have access to the information, right? So I would say it's not all our fault. It is today. It's our fault if we don't know today because we got all these resources. But in the past, we didn't have access, right? So Jerusalem didn't become Greek overnight, right? Greek political rule arrived, then cultural pressure followed, right? And so then we get these rebellions, and then we have the whole story of the Maccabees and Antiochus and all this stuff. Now, Antiochus, Epiphanes was from Antioch, right? Okay, which was an area in Turkey, modern day Turkey. Now, it's interesting that if we look at the history, right? Because today we look at Turkey as a Middle Eastern country or nation, but Turkey is really European. So what happened was, so after that, you had the Hasmonean dynasty come to power, right? The Hasmonean dynasty ruled Jerusalem for about a century after the Maccabean revolt, right? That's between 140 to 37 BCE. Now, the interesting thing is, which I didn't know about the differences between the different, let's say, competition for rulership, was the fact that the Hasmonean dynasty were what they call priest kings, right? They were called priest kings, not Davidic monarchs, right? Because rulership is supposed to come from Judah, not from Levi, not from the Levites. But the Hasmonean dynasty was Levitic priesthood who ruled Jerusalem, who became kings as well as priests. So this is what caused some problems there, right? So the final Hasmonean ruler, his name was Antigonus II Matthias. He seized Jerusalem in 40 BCE with Parthian military backing, deposed his rival Hyrcanus II, and ruled directly from the city. Now, what happened is Rome came in and changed the game. So if you notice, the only time Jerusalem was taken over was when Alexander defeated, right? When Alexander defeated the Israelites, and really his generals did, because Alexander's kingdom split into four, right? And they ended up taking over and controlling Jerusalem. Okay, and so the Ptolemies, right? They were Greek. They were controlling Egypt, and they ended up controlling Jerusalem first, then the Seleucids, and then Antiochus. All right, so we got that sequence of events. So Rome did not like Antigonus. Okay, so the Parthian alliance sealed his fate. The Roman Senate declared Herod the Great king in 40 BCE. So Rome put Herod as a client king, right? Or an administrator of Jerusalem. That's how Herod came to power. It wasn't through invasion. It wasn't through a siege, right? It was all politics. And we're going to see how all of this lines up to where Rome's influence continued and their control over that region. Now, for all of you all who believed all of this happened in the Levant, y'all could just move along, okay? And I'm going to show you why it did not happen in the Levant and why my analysis makes sense, okay? So even though Herod did not yet control Jerusalem per se, right? He was an administrator, right? Roman legions took the city in 37 BCE. Antigonus was captured and executed, and Hasmonean rule ended. All right, so they had to get rid of the rulership by the Levitical priesthood, who were also kings and priests. So from then on, what happened is Jerusalem fell under this client king system. Herod ruled by Roman authority, Roman backing, and Roman strategic interest. Now, keep that in mind. Roman strategic interest. Why did Rome have a strategic interest in Jerusalem? And we got to talk about that, because it's very important to which version of history and land you're going to believe. What was Rome's strategic interest in modern Levant? Ask yourself that question, family. What's in the modern Levant? And I know what the arguments are, but what's in the modern Levant? Assuming you believe that's our land. What's in the modern Levant that is of strategic interest to Rome? That's the question. So we had the Hasmonean priest kings, Antigonus II Matthias. He was the last Hasmonean ruler. He got put down by Rome, right? Roman conquest. And here's the thing. The Roman conquest wasn't like a siege, right? What happened was Herod, right? He was trying to rule and he got resistance. And so basically Rome came in to give him support. There was never a major Roman invasion. See, Herod was trying to run things, and you got the Maccabees and all that, the whole Hasmonean folks. And all of this stuff caused this chaos you see during the time of the Messiah, right? So none of that ended, right? They still were trying to get rid of the rulership of Rome by proxy. That's what we call it today, right? We call it proxy. So remember, the Hasmonean dynasty was a priestly ruling house that took control of Jerusalem after the revolt against the Greek imperial rule. Because remember, the Ptolemies were ruling, right? The Seleucids and then Antiochus. So it began as a rebellion led by temple priests and ended as a theocratic monarchy. So that's what happened during that time. So during the time of the Messiah, we had this whole dynamic going on. So the Hasmoneans rose out of the Maccabean revolt in the mid-2nd century BCE. Judea at the time was under the Seleucid Empire, which tried to enforce Greek religious practices and suppress temple law. So that's where we get Matthias, who was a priest, and his sons rejected that, and we had this revolt. They got put down, and so then comes Rome and put Herod on the throne. Okay, so we got all that. Now, what's interesting here, and something for me, I didn't know, maybe you knew, is the distinction between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. So basically you had these both of these groups that came out of the Hasmonean priestly rule, right? So the Pharisees and the Sadducees emerged as responses to the political and religious reality on the ground there in Jerusalem created by the Hasmonean dynasty. Remember, Hasmonean was ruled by a priestly kingship, Levitical priesthood. They blurred the line between Judah, who was supposed to rule, and the Levitical priesthood. So they just ruled. So they always had resistance. So the Hasmoneans were priests who took kingship. And remember, that violated Torah. And so the priesthood came from Levi and kingship came from David, which is Judah, and the scepter shall not depart from Judah. So this caused issues. Now the Sadducees aligned with the Hasmoneans. The Sadducees aligned with the Hasmoneans. They were drawn from the Jerusalem priestly elite. So this was the elite folks, right? And all of this is important when you start looking at the scripture and when you start talking about the people who, you know how they say a lot of times that, the Jews crucified their Messiah. Well, that's not true. Because if you look at the history and you look at Torah, right, the people were for Yahusha. The common man was for Yahusha. It was the elite rulership of Jerusalem that went against the Messiah. Why? Because the elite was making money with Rome. But anyway, so we got to understand you had these aristocratic families who benefited from the Hasmonean system of power. And they accepted Hasmonean as the legitimate rulers. Why? Because they had the temple. And they claimed authority as being priests. Now, they're not priest kings like the Messiah, but they claimed authority as priests, and this would cause issues. So the Sadducees, they weren't rebels per se, they were insiders, right? They went along with the current administration, which was the Hasmonean rulership. So the Sadducees supported the priest king rulership, the Hasmonean rulership, the Levitical rulership, which was against Torah. So then here comes the Pharisees, right? The Pharisees were the opposition party. So we got the Republicans and the Democrats, right? So we got the Pharisees who emerged from the scribes and the teachers and the legal interpreters, right? Paul the Pharisees, he was skilled in the law, right? So the Pharisees were scribes, teachers, legal interpreters who challenged the Hasmonean fusion of priest and king. So the Pharisees were holding to the traditions of the Torah and the oral law as well. So that's why the Pharisees went against the Hasmonean rule. So basically they were pushing against the Hasmonean rule, right? And this temple monopoly and control of daily life and all of this, right? And so the oral law was not a power grab. It was a survival mechanism that allowed covenant life to function, right? So the Pharisees was following Torah, whereas the Sadducees was following the Hasmonean elite. Well, they were part of the Hasmonean elite. The Sadducees were elites. Okay. The Pharisees were the scribes and the teachers. And we see that in the scriptures. So the Hasmonean rulers reacted harshly to this resistance, right? And so there was a ruler by the name of Alexander Janus. And Pharisees were persecuted, exiled, and killed, right? Trying to maintain power. So the Sadducees existed because the Hasmonean priest kings needed institutional support, and the Pharisees existed because Hasmonean priest kings created a legitimacy crisis. Neither group makes sense without Hasmonean rule. Before the Hasmoneans, there was no need for these factions in their later forms. Okay? So when Rome arrived, the fracture remained. Rome simply exploited it. So what we understand here is that Rome put Herod on the throne, and he was just a client king for Rome, or what we call today a proxy. Okay, Herod was a proxy king. Now, why did I go through all of that first, right? So we got to understand what we're dealing with before we get into where I'm going to teach about how Rome came to power. So here we see the Seleucid Empire, right? We see here Ptolemy's ruling Egypt and Greece over here. Turkey is right up in here, right? Now, what I'm going to show you is what I believe the true history was happening of. And what we get from history is how the Ptolemies, once they were overthrown, what Rome did. We're going to talk about what Rome did after they overthrew the Ptolemaic Empire. And remember, all of this, in my opinion at least, gives valid credence to the letter of Aristeas. And it's interesting why a lot of people ignore the letter of Aristeas, because it's very important. And to me, once you start studying the history and what they said happened, right? Now, the only difference between what I'm going to talk about today is location. Because some people believe this little spot right here, which is called the modern state of Israel, right, is the true land, and this whole Gaza thing right here, right, which that's a whole nother study in and of itself. We could talk about that. But understand this. This was the setup during the time the Ptolemies controlled Egypt and Rome came to take over what the Ptolemies had, okay? So we're going to get into my presentation now. All right, so Rome took Egypt first. So you saw on the map, the previous map, where the Ptolemaic Empire controlled Egypt. So Rome did not conquer Jerusalem by marching legions into it. Rome conquered the infrastructure that sustained Jerusalem. The turning point was Rome's takeover of Egypt in 30 BCE. Egypt controlled grain, taxation, and Nile transport systems. So this is important because what we see here is that Rome strategically took over what we call today East Africa. And this is why they ended up controlling Jerusalem, right? And supporting Herod. And we're going to talk about their reasons behind it. And to me, it makes a whole lot more sense, instead of the modern interpretation of the Levant and what they say the reason was the Romans conquered the Levant or put Herod in control of Levant. It just don't make sense. I'm sorry. If you really spend the time, the whole thing about the Levant just breaks, right? So Cassius Dio, Roman history. And this is about Emperor Augustus. Afterwards, Augustus, made Egypt tributary and gave it in charge of Cornelius Gallus. For in view of the populousness of the cities and country, the facile, fickle character of the inhabitants and the extent of the grain supply, and of the wealth so far from daring to entrust the land to any senator, he would not even grant a senator permission to live in it, except as he personally made the concession to him by name. So Augustus took over Egypt, kicked the Ptolemies out, and he didn't even let senators of Rome come in because he was afraid that they would try to take it over. That's very interesting, isn't it? That shows you how much autonomy these senators had because Augustus ended up making himself Caesar. So far from daring to entrust the land to any senator, he would not even grant a senator permission to live in it, except as he personally made the concession to him by name. On the other hand, he did not allow the Egyptians to be senators in Rome. So even though Egyptians became citizens of Rome, he did not allow Egyptians to become senators to represent, sort of like our senators, right? America is built off this same system, but we're going to talk about that. But whereas he made various dispositions as regards to several cities, he commanded the Alexandrians, that's in Egypt, to conduct their government without senators. With such capacity for revolution, I suppose, did he credit them. And of the system then imposed upon them, most details are rigorously preserved at the present time, but they have their senators both in Alexandria, beginning first under the Emperor Severus, and also in Rome, these having first been enrolled in the Senate in the reign of Severus, son of Antonius. All right, so we see here that controlling the resources of Egypt was very important to Augustus, right? And he didn't even want the senators to even come and live in the land unless he specifically chose one, right? So we got to understand that what Augustus was doing was controlling the grain of Rome and the food of Rome. He was controlling the food of Rome. And so this is very important because we got to understand how important East Africa was to the Roman Empire and what was truly happening during the time that Augustus ruled. All right. So Egypt was placed under direct imperial authority. Senators were forbidden to enter without imperial permission. Whoever controlled Egypt controlled Rome's food supply. Now, whoever controlled Egypt controlled Rome's food supply. Now, so we see that logically, this was a strategic military move. And so we understand that Augustus saw the strategic value of taking control of Egypt. Now we know that that's the same reason that the Ptolemies, who were Greek, took control of Egypt, because Egypt was a food basket. Okay. So Augustus, what he ended up doing was reorganize the Roman state, and he reformed taxation. He professionalized the army. He stabilized borders, expanded the infrastructure, and initiated what later writers called the Pax Romana, right, which was a long period of relative peace and internal stability. Now, you can see some of the things that Augustus did happening today, right? Professional army, taxation, stabilizing borders, infrastructure, stealing people's resources. Stealing people's resources. Now, who does that remind you of, family? Who does that remind you of? Stealing people's resources. I wonder, does it look like America? Does it look like France? Does it look like Britain? So not only did Augustus controlled the Nile, the Romans ended up controlling Egypt. The Romans also controlled the Nile. So Rome treated the Nile as a system, not a border. Administration extended to Upper Egypt. The Nile was secured to the first cataract at Aswan. Now, I'm going to pause this right quick because I want to show you something. So Rome treated the Nile as a system, not a border. The Nile was secured to the first cataract. Now I'm going to show you this. Now here's a Google map I created, right? Now you all know where I believe true Jerusalem is, right? In the Highlands of Ethiopia. Here's where I believe the 12 tribes were, okay? And so what happened was Rome controlled what we call Egypt, right? Memphis. And they controlled all the way down to Aswan. Aswan is right here. Now let's look at that. Also called the Syene. And Roman controlled Elephantine Island. This is Elephantine Island. Now this is in the Nile. So the Romans controlled this as well, right? The Elephantine Island. Now this is interesting because there was a Jewish, what they call Jewish or Israelite temple that was located here on Elephantine Island. Now, let's see. Okay. So back here, where I believe true Jerusalem is, and the land as it was allocated to the 12 tribes. Now, if you look at the history, right, this allocation and this land dynamic or this geography makes more sense than the Levant, okay? And, well, let's look at that right quick. We're going to come right back to this. So compare what you're looking at right here, which is where I believe true Jerusalem is, the true land of Israel, and compare that to this. Look how cramped it is, right? Understand this, right? That according to modern theory, I'm going to call it a theory, the major source of water would have been what they call the Sea of Galilee. Could barely supply one tribe, let alone all 12 tribes. Okay. Let alone the access to food and everything else. And the deserts that's surrounding it and the enemies that are surrounding them. Make it make sense. If Rome wanted to take over Jerusalem, according to this landmass, all they would have to do is control the water supply. All they would have to do is control the Sea of Galilee. That's what they call it. But if you look at this layout, they would have to control larger territory. And when you start studying and looking at, the history of, when Israel was invaded by the Assyrians and Israel was invaded by Babylon and stuff like that, they would come in through the Nile system and work their way in through this waterway, right, and come into what we call, or at least what I call, the land of Israel. If you want to call it Israel, Israel is a people. Okay, Israel is a people. Let's just get that straight. But for simple sake, the land where the Israelites were located, and and the land that was allocated to them, right, would have been this larger territory here. Okay, so you can go and see where I allocate these tribes. Now, this is my best guess at where, according to the text and according to the layout, in the scriptures and according to the waters and the rivers, this is my best guess on where the tribes were. Okay, and Jerusalem was over here where Judah is. Okay, and Lalibela. Okay, which I believe to be the Temple Mount. So let's get back to where I was. All right, so Rome controlled Upper Egypt, and they ended up controlling the Nile all the way up to the first cataract. So Strabo, who's a historian, he says, since in my description of Arabia, I've also included the gulfs which pinch it and make it a peninsula, I mean the Persian and Arabian gulfs, and at the same time have gone the rounds of certain parts, both of Egypt and of Ethiopia, I mean the countries of the troglodytes, and the peoples situated in order thereafter as far as the cinnamon-bearing country, I must now set forth the remaining parts that are continuous with these tribes, that is, the parts in the neighborhood of the Nile. And after this I shall traverse Libya, which is not modern Libya, right? It just means a part of Africa, which is the last remaining subject of my whole geography. And here too, I must first set forth the declarations of I always have trouble with this. Eratosthenes. Okay, so we got the Egypt and Ethiopia. Now, this is not modern Ethiopia, right? This is Africa. Okay, or what we call Africa. And remember, I showed you in other videos about Upper and Lower Ethiopia, right? We discussed that in other shows, right? So we have this, and so we what we know right now is that Augustus took over Egypt, and Augustus controlled the Nile all the way up to the first cataract, which is by Aswan or Sinai or Sinai. Right, so Eratosthenes, oh, I have trouble with that. Eratosthenes, okay, was a 3rd century BCE polymath who treated knowledge like a connected system rather than a set of silos. He worked in mathematics and geography. So pretty much he's the one that mapped out this location. Now, Eratosthenes was born in Cyrene in modern Libya and later moved to Alexandria in Egypt. The Ptolemaic king appointed him chief librarian, which placed him at the crossroads of texts from Africa, Greece, Persia, and beyond. So he mapped out this area and what was happening during this time, right? So we can look at him as, someone who was there at the time of the Ptolemies and also at the time when things started to shift. So Eratosthenes, oh, I hate that name. I can't. Did not leave a standalone ethnographic book that survives intact. So everything we have from him comes from Strabo. Okay, everything about him comes from Strabo. And Eratosthenes described the inhabitants south of Egypt, especially those inland and upriver toward the Ethiopian highlands, modern Ethiopia, as indigenous, ancient, and self-governing, right? Not recent settlers. So Strabo preserves this framework that we see in Geography 17.1, where he attributes the regional layout directly to Eratosthenes. So one thing we know, Eratosthenes called the people of the land troglodytes. Now, I believe this is why today you have so little references, at least from the Greco-Roman power structures of the time, of Israelite nations, because they were all classified as troglodytes. And some were classified as Ethiopians, right? Ethiopians mean dark skin, right? And some were classified as troglodytes. So the troglodytes were not a single nation, but a collective name used by Greek and Roman writers for several indigenous people living along the Red Sea coast, and nearby deserts, mainly between Egypt, Nubia, and the Horn of Africa. The name comes from Greek and means cave dwellers. Ancient authors used it descriptively, not ethnically. Some groups lived in rock shelters or shallow caves, others in temporary huts. The label reflected lifestyle and geography, not ancestors. So it was a classification of a group of people who were, who were farmers basically, right? Or nomads, right? So they call them troglodytes, cave dwellers. Now, Eratosthenes says that, they were along the Red Sea coast, right? And the nearby deserts. But also, they later on usage for the word troglodytes was also used for people in the highlands of Ethiopia. So you had people who were literally living in caves, right? We know that in Ethiopia. We know even in the Bible that they had caves. We know that Lazarus was buried in a cave. We know that the Messiah was buried in a cave, right? So once again, that gives more credence to my location of Jerusalem. All right, so troglodytes in the highland. Ancient writers sometimes applied the label troglodytes to people living in the Ethiopian highlands, even though that usage is sloppy by modern standards. So, a lot of people don't want to use it because it became a byword, right? Troglodytes became a byword. And today, they don't want to use that terminology. But basically, it was people in that, I would say, in East Africa, right? Just to sum it up. So, functional description. Greek and Roman authors use troglodytes as a functional description, not a precise ethnic term, right? So it was inclusive of a bunch of people who lived in that area. It meant people who lived in rugged, rocky, and carnivorous terrain, often pastoral, semi-nomadic, and outside formal city life. Can we say farmers? Can we say nomads? Once you understand that the Ethiopian highlands fall squarely into the zone where ancient writers stretch the term. So, once again, we know through history that Israelites lived in this area. Give me one if you know that Israelites lived in the Ethiopian highlands. They lived in the Simeon Mountains. They lived in this whole area, right? We got remnants of it today, what they call Beta Israel. So obviously, the reason why we don't hear the term Israelites or Ezra Alawi or Yasharal is because they were grouped by the term troglodytes. They were grouped by the term troglodytes. Now, the question is, was this done on purpose? That's the question. Was this done on purpose to hide who the Israelites are? To classify them with the rest of the people in the area who were living in a carnivorous terrain? Right? Rocky, rugged mountain, who was pastoral, semi-nomadic, outside of former city? Is this the reason why they were included with the term troglodytes? You notice during this time, you don't really hear the term Israelites, even though Israelites were numerous and was a great kingdom at one time. And we know that they knew of the Israelites because guess what? The Romans ended up taking control over the nation through proxy. which is a better term than client king in my opinion, but it's a modern term. So the Ethiopian highlands, especially confused outsiders, the region is elevated, cut by deep gorges full of rock formations and caves, and climatically distant from the Nile Valley. From a Mediterranean observer's perspective, people living there fit the same mental category as Red Sea cave dwellers, even if they were settled agriculturalists with long traditions of kingship, temples, and literacy. So we know that they know, or knew, let's say, that Israelites lived in that area. Because historically, we have the documentation. And we have the Beta Israels who had their own kingdom in the Simeon Mountains, and according to them, going back for 2,000 years. So obviously they knew the Israelites. And if the Beta Israels were living there for over 2,000 years, that gives more credence to my position that this is where the true land is. But hey, let's continue. So hiding the Ezra Alawi, ancient writers did not write to preserve indigenous identities. They wrote to serve imperial administration, trade logistics, and Greek or Roman worldview. That context alone makes systematic obscuring likely, even without a coordinated plot. Why? Because they included all these people as the same group of people that they wanted to control or administer to or to tax. So Greek and Roman authors regularly collapsed distinct peoples into vague labels when those peoples were outside direct political control. Troglodytes, Ethiopians, Libyans, and Scythians function as distant markers, not ethnic descriptions. Once a population fell beyond the Nile corridor or outside Roman taxation, precision disappeared. So they grouped all of these people by a broad category. That's why you don't see them talking about the Israelites, though we know according to scriptures that the Romans controlled Jerusalem. All right. So the Ezra Alawi presence, at the same time, Israelite presence in the Ethiopian and Upper Nile regions is independently attested through. How do we know that the Ezra Alawi, the Israelites, the Yasharal, were in the Nile Valley area? Well, as I said, there was an Israelite community on Elephantine Island. Meroitic and Nubian border populations, long-standing traditions preserved among Beta Israel, repeated classical references to circumcised law-keeping peoples south of Egypt. So the texts validate that Israelites lived along the Nile. Let me come back to this. So we're going to come back to this. Once again, this is where I believe the nation of Israel truly is. And remember, there was an Israelite presence on Elephantine Island. Where is that? In the Nile. So why is there an Israelite presence in the Nile when modern scholars want you to believe that Israel is over here? It is because Israelite presence extended all the way from here down through Sudan, parts of Sudan at one time, all the way up to this part of the Nile. Some of the Israelite presence also came over here to Arabia. We got history on that. We got the history of the Igbo and the Limba coming from Yemen. Once again, we're tied to the same area where there was Israelites, right? So we'll keep going. All right, so Elephantine Island, the synagogue at Elephantine Island refers to an Israelite temple and community that existed on the Elephantine Island in southern Egypt. near modern Aswan during the 5th century BC under Persian rule. This is not traditional legend. It is one of the biggest documented Israelite communities outside the land, known almost entirely through primary text. Now, why would a nation want to live along the Nile? Because a big nation like Israel needs what? Water. A nation that was supposedly in or near the Garden of Eden need what? A lot of water. Therefore, they need what? The Nile. Not that desert over there in the Middle East. So what existed at Elephantine? An Israelite military colony lived on Elephantine Island as part of a frontier garrison guarding Egypt's southern border. These Jews served as soldiers and administrators. They had families, property, contracts, and courts. Most importantly, they had a functioning temple where they worshiped Yahuwah. This temple predated Persian rule and stood alongside Egyptian temples on the island. So it predated Persian rule. Think of that. It offered sacrifices. It had priests. It followed covenant customs, including Sabbath observance and Passover as confirmed by letters. So if it predated, come on now, stick with me here. If it predated Persian rule, did that mean it was under Israelite control, right? Yes or no? At some point. Why Elephantine matters. This community proves several things at once. First, Israelites lived along the Nile far south, not just in the highlands of Ethiopia. Second, they practiced covenant worship outside Jerusalem, including sacrifice. Third, imperial powers tolerated Israelite religious life when it served state interests. So Israelites lived along the Nile, far south, not just the highlands. And we got proof historically that Beta Israel been there for, according to them, in the highlands for over 2,000 years. Rome ended Elephantine. By the time Rome ruled Egypt, it no longer tolerated autonomous Israelite military religious enclaves on the Nile. The Elephantine model ended. The Roman model centralized control, eliminated armed covenant communities, and absorbed the Nile fully. So what happened was, let me show you again. Let me come back here. What happened was, what happened was, okay, the Romans set up a base on Elephantine Island, right? And they had garrisons and they had control all along the Nile from Egypt, right? From Egypt all the way down to the first cataract, which allowed them to control taxation, trade, routes, and everything, right? So let's go back. So by the time Rome ruled Egypt, it no longer tolerated autonomous Israelite military religious enclaves on the Nile. The Elephantine model ended. The Roman model centralized control, eliminated armed covenant communities, and absorbed the Nile fully. Institutional bias or plot. Using a term like troglodyte solved several problems at once. It avoided naming a covenant people with an ancient legal and religious system. It reduced settled, organized highland populations into a lifestyle caricature. It disconnected those groups from biblical history by replacing lineage with terrain. This does not require a single conscious decision to hide Israelites. It only requires institutional bias plus convenience, which history supplies in abundance. Now, we see that the Europeans, the Westerners, always rename things. They renamed India, right? They renamed who the true people are. Everything right. They renamed Africa, called it Africa or Ethiopia at one time, Libya. They always rename things. Aswan and Elephantine. Aswan functioned as a natural choke point. Elephantine Island sits inside the Nile itself. All river traffic passed under Roman oversight. So guess what? You want to come pass over and pass through there, you're going to pay a toll. You're going to pay a tax. They control trade. They control access to water for the people in that area. Israelite markers. There's also a textual pattern worth noting. Classical writers often describe troglodytes with traits that quietly overlap with Israelite markers, such as pastoral economies, clan organizations, strict customs, separation from neighbors, and resistance to imperial absorption. Yet they never explore those traits any further. The label acts as a stopping point. Inquiry stops there. You don't ask any more questions. They're troglodytes. Stop. Well, what's a troglodyte? How many people do that? No, most people don't. What makes up a troglodyte? Most people don't. What makes up an Ethiopian? Most people don't ask. This is controlling the narrative. Nubia after Rome. Nubia remained formally independent, economically and logistically constrained. Resistance proved costly in their earlier conflict. Queen Candace. Strabo describes how the Nubians, can we say Cushites, led by a Kandake, or ruling queen, attacked Roman-controlled Egypt shortly after Rome annexed Egypt. So she knew what was happening, right? Rome was coming in to control the food supply and control the Nile River. Key points from Strabo's account. Nubian forces raided southern Egypt, attacking Sine, or Saine, which is Aswan. Elephantine and Philae, they fought Roman troops under the prefect Gaius Petronius. After the initial conflict, Petronius counterattacked, advancing deep into Nubian territory. Nubia then withdrew from continued warfare and negotiated peace. A treaty was concluded that favored Nubia, not Rome. Strabo explicitly states that Rome chose not to continue conquest and accepted a buffer zone instead. So Rome didn't want a protracted warfare with Cush. Now remember, the Egyptian kingdom was made up of Cushites. And at some time, Cushite kings, as you saw if you saw my other video, ruled Egypt. They didn't want a protracted war, so they made an agreement. Hey, you don't come here, we don't go there. But they did have a fight. So Kandake is the original Meroitic title. Candace in the Greek and Roman spelling of the same title. Greek writers rendered Kandake as Kandike or Kandake. Latin writers rendered it as Candace. English translations usually follow the Latin form. So once again, they always change the names. Kandake, they called her Candace. Saul, they call him Paul. Yeshua, they called him Jesus. Ethiopians want peace. The Ethiopians, after waging war and testing Roman strength, withdrew and made peace, and no tribute was imposed upon them. So when the Cushites backed off because Rome was giving them a bloody nose, Rome said, okay, we cool. We're not going to force any taxes on you. Nubia tested Rome. Rome did not conquer Nubia. Nubia initiated the conflict, tested Roman expansion, then disengaged on its own terms. Rome accepted a non-expansion boundary, something it rarely did unless resistance was costly or strategically unnecessary. So it wasn't worth Rome to fight that war, right? It was better to have a treaty so that they can continue to control the food basket, which is Egypt, and the Nile River. Understand, you're not going to be ruling anything unless you have water and unless you have fertile land where you can control things. Now, Rome not only used Egypt to have good food, right? To have good land, to grow crops, to feed Rome, but it was also to control East Africa. Archaeological confirmation. There is material evidence supporting this account. A bronze head of Augustus was found buried beneath the steps of a temple at Meroe, interpreted as a symbolic act of dominance after the Nubian raid. Roman forts south of Syene were later abandoned or reduced, indicating Rome pulled back rather than pushed forward. So Rome was in the area. Rome was in Meroe. How far is Meroe, which is in Sudan, from modern Ethiopia? Pressure inland. Once Egypt and the Nile were controlled by Rome, inland regions were pressured. Control came through taxation and dependency. Life and worship continued. Autonomy did not. So historically, what do we know from the Bible? That Rome controlled through Herod, and Herod collected taxes for Rome. Once again, all of this makes sense. Rome controlling the Nile and the civilizations along the Nile, and those all the way up to the Ethiopian highland, and those people around there who was classified as troglodytes. Jerusalem was isolated. Rome absorbed surrounding territories first. Food, pilgrims, and revenue were regulated. Sacred importance did not protect their isolation. So Rome controlled the Nile, controlled access to the Nile, taxed people who lived along the Nile and people who wanted to cross the Nile. Therefore, we see how Jerusalem ended up being a part of it all. And why Jerusalem ended up being taxed. It's this whole thing. Rome controlled the Nile. Isolation allowed Roman control. Rome did not need to occupy Jerusalem heavily or continuously to control it. Isolation made control easier, not harder. They cleared up everything with the Cushites. They made a treaty with the Cushites. But Rome still collecting taxes along the Nile and against those troglodytes, which would be inclusive of Israelites. Rome absorbed surrounding territories first. Rome's method was concentric. It secured Egypt, Syria, Arabia, and key coastal routes before tightening pressure on Jerusalem. Once those regions were Roman, Jerusalem lost strategic depth. No independent allies, no alternate trade corridors, no fallback routes. Control did not come from marching legions daily through the city. It came from owning everything around it. So, first of all, Rome controlled the breadbasket. Rome controlled the Nile all the way up to the Aswan and further, in my opinion, which is why they ended up having a conflict with the Cushites or the Nubians. Even though Candace decided, hey, let's push these jokers back because we see what they're doing. That's my opinion anyway. So Rome had control of that whole area, which is the source of life, the Nile. Does it not make more sense that it was strategically, and remember, I say we're going to come back to that Roman strategy. It was more strategic for Rome to control the Nile than to control a supposed trade route through what they call Jerusalem today, or call Israel today, or call Palestine today. What makes more sense, family? Come on now. That as they controlled the breadbasket of the time, which was Egypt, to feed Rome, which was Egypt, right? They also controlled, as we see historically, all the way up to the Aswan. And they started collecting taxes from the neighboring people, the troglodytes. which would be inclusive of the Israelites, what makes more sense? That Rome was in that region or that territory, or Rome spent their time controlling a little dirt in the Middle East? What would be the sense of Rome control? Look, if Rome wanted to control modern Israel, all they had to do was control the water source, which wasn't hard. Historically, during 70 AD, at the siege of Jerusalem, they surrounded the whole place. They starved the people. Remember, according to the scriptures, they would eat their own flesh and the flesh of their children. Why? Because they ain't have access to food, water, and all those things. But according even to Josephus, Jerusalem was hard to assail. Is the Middle East, where Jerusalem is today, hard to assail? Come on now. Is it hard to attack the Levant? But according to Josephus, it was hard for the Romans to assail Jerusalem. Same thing with the letter of Aristeas, which was written by a Ptolemy king. Jerusalem was hard to assail in the highlands. Food, pilgrims, and revenue were regulated. Jerusalem depended on inflows. Grain moved through Roman-controlled Egypt and Syria. Pilgrims traveled on Roman roads, paid Roman tolls, used Roman ports. Temple taxes, trade, and currency all passed through systems Rome supervised. When Rome controlled movement, Rome controlled survival. A city that cannot feed itself or fund itself cannot resist for long, even if it claims sacred status. If you go read the history and you go read Josephus, you can see how long it took them to conquer Jerusalem. I'm sorry, when you look at the Levant, it wouldn't take that long to control and conquer it. It's flat. It's a flat plain. Where the defense structures at? I'm just saying. And look how close the tribes are on the maps of the Levant. Impossible. But if you look at, let me go back to it one more time. So this is what they want us to believe, right? All of these tribes were close up together like this, right? The only water source really is here because they didn't have, modern technology like we do to filter out the salt from the Mediterranean Sea. Then you got the Dead Sea here. How would they survive? Not only that, if the Romans were coming here, how hard would it be to take all of these people who were bashed up together? How hard would it be? It wouldn't be that hard. But when we come here, it is very hard because you got tribes that extend out, right? So as they came down the Nile and came into this territory, they would run into certain tribes. They would be running into Gad and other tribes as they came in. They would run into Naphtali as they came here, coming through the Bahir Dar area. So as they came along here, they would have to run into Naphtali, which according to scriptures, we see the Assyrians ran into, right? And then they'd have to come all the way through here, right? And they'll come to the Sea of Galilee, which is Lake Hayek, in my opinion, right? So in order to get all the way through here, they have to come through all of these tribes. Now, doesn't it make it seem like a more logical scenario that this would be the real Jerusalem and the Israelites in the land that was allocated to the Israelites? They would have to come through these tribes first, and then all of to get to Jerusalem, which is Lalibela. So you can see where it would be very difficult to assail Jerusalem in this situation than in the Levant. I mean, this is logic 101. Compare assailing this, which is the highlands, which is where Lalibela is, which is where I believe the temple was, and compare that to this. How hard would it take to conquer this? Not very long at all. All right, so sacred importance did not protect isolation. Jerusalem's holiness encouraged inward focus and separation, but that same separation limited its political leverage. Sacred cities assume reverence will restrain empires. Empires do not work that way. Rome respected sanctuaries only when they did not interfere with order, taxation, or control. Once sacred authority competed with imperial authority, Rome treated it as a security problem and not a religious one. Can we say when Israel started to rebel and they had to send in the troops after 70 AD? Well, during 70 AD? Rome ruled like modern Western empires. Rome will allow the proxy king or the client king to rule so long as they can collect their taxes. And they will allow you to have your religion so long as they can collect their taxes. It's just like France and England and the US does to Africa today. They put these puppets in like Tinubu. They allow Tinubu to rule so long as they get their money and they get their resources. They get their taxes. Rome did the same thing the Western powers do today. They took Egypt and took their resources. Nothing has changed. We are still in a Roman system, conquering nations, taking their resources, taking out their leaders, pew-pewing, controlling trade, and getting taxes through IMF and the World Bank. Nothing's changed. They've been doing the same thing forever. So why Herod ruled? This setup made Herod's rule possible and useful to Rome. Rome preferred a local administrator. Herod ruled by imperial appointment. He enforced Roman interests through local system. Now, I know some of y'all gonna say he looked like Haile Selassie. Yeah, he does. Hint, hint. I still think Haile Selassie a Edomite. That's what I think. I don't think anything has changed. Herod's administration. That's a misspelling right there. Heroes. Rome governed vast territory with limited manpower. Direct rule everywhere was expensive and unstable. Rome learned that local rulers could manage populations more efficiently because they understood language, customs, religious sensitivities, and internal rivalries. A local king absorbed resentment that would otherwise target Rome itself. Rome kept power without constant legions on the ground. Sounds like today, right? Ruling through proxy. The French controlled all these African nations through client kings, collected their taxes and their resources for pennies. And who they blame? The king, the chief, the president. When all the time is Rome. So once again, just as our ancestors did in Africa, in the highlands of Ethiopia, there was a rebellion. There was a coup d'etat. And Rome had to send in the troops. Just like what Ibrahim them did to the French. Like Niger did to the French in the US. There was a coup d'etat. Same old, same old. Ain't nothing changed. We still under the Roman system. But the administration of the system that we are in today is a Greek-run administrative system. We got the Senate. We got the Caesar we call president. We got the courts. It's the same Greek system. But the Roman army is still running around invading people and taking their stuff. Nothing's changed. That's why we call them colonizers. But they're Romans. Same thing with the Rev 2939s. They're Romans. They're converts. All of this is Roman. The people in power are Roman. There's a whole discussion we could have on that. Herod installed as king. Herod the Great did not rise through popular legitimacy or ancestral right alone. Rome installed him. His authority flowed downward from imperial backing, not upward from the people. That meant his survival depended on Roman approval, not public support. Loyalty ran one way, toward Rome. Loyalty runs one way from Africa, towards the West, towards Europe, towards America. Even though now it's starting to become a little bit more multipolar, right? Because now China's involved and Russia's involved, but nothing has changed. It's the same game, but we don't know. Herod enforced Roman interests. Herod collected taxes using existing administrative structures which were left over from Greek when Alexander controlled everything. Herod controlled food distribution tied to the Roman supply chains. Herod regulated pilgrimage, construction, and security in ways that kept order and revenue flowing. Understand this. Not only was the Nile important because Rome can collect taxes from people who travel alongst it, right? And trade is a trade route that in order to get to the other side, you're going to cross at some of these points. You're going to go through Roman checkpoints. You're going to pay fees. Sound like America? Everywhere you go, you taxed. You drive on the roads, you tax. Rome did the same thing. So everybody been taxed, and Rome is making a killing. The pilgrimages were the best time for Rome. Why? Because all these pilgrims are coming into the Ethiopian highlands, coming into Israel for the celebration of the feast days and collecting taxes from the ones who got to come there because they're Israelites. He was a moneymaker. This is why they were interested in the nation of Israel, what we call Israel, even though Israel is a people. Rome was making a killing off of the pilgrims who would come in to offer sacrifices for the Passover year after. Not only did they make money from the taxes for collecting for people traveling amongst their toll roads, sound interesting. They made money off of people traveling the toll roads. They also make money for collecting taxes for the people when they go to Jerusalem to live in what we would call hotels today, or the motels, or the inns. Once again, sounds like what? The West. Sounds like America. Collecting tolls. Nothing has changed. Administrative conquest. Taxes was felt locally. Compliance appeared internal. Rome ruled without constant military presence. So compliance appeared internal. It's an Israelite thing. It's Herod's fault. It's Tinubu's fault, which it is because they're clients of the Roman Empire, even today. But you're never looking at the main enemy. Who signed the Dumb Diverses? It was the Pope, Roman Pope, the Vatican. But most people not pointing at them. Who we pointing at? The French, the British, the Americans, the Portuguese, the Spaniards. All of them Catholic, Christian nations, Roman nations. Today is the same thing. Catholicism is Roman. Christianity is Roman. But we only point to the ones we see and not the ones at the top. Why? Because the Vatican collected its money through tithes from those nations. Rome collected its money, I'm talking about Holy Roman Empire, collected it through tithes and collected it through givings and offerings from the nation states to Rome. Nothing's changed. Authority withdrawn. Leadership was compromised. Sacred systems served power more than justice. Authority was removed before physical destruction. The timing of the Messiah. This timing was not accidental. The conditions under Herod the Great and Roman oversight created the exact pressure environment the scriptures describe. Roman oversight unified the world stage, which is today. It's still the Roman Empire. It unified the world stage. Rome imposed a single political order across vast regions. Roads, law, taxation, and administration became standardized. That mattered because any event meant to confront nations, not a village, required a connected world. A fragmented landscape would have contained the message. A Roman one forced it outward. Once again, we're living in a Roman system. Laws, taxation, administration, standardization. Can we say the mixed multitude? Can we say the melting pot, which is also Babylonian? Nothing has changed. Technology has changed. Deception has changed. But we're under the same system. Herod, a false king. Herod ruled by Roman appointment, not covenant legitimacy. He rebuilt, taxed, and enforced order, but he could not embody righteous kingship. That contradiction sharpened expectation. The people lived under a king who claimed authority yet depended on the empire. That tension made the question unavoidable. Who truly rules, Caesar or Yahuwah? We're under the same thing again. Who rules you, Caesar or Yahuwah? See, this is the difference between a awakened, born-again Israelite. Because I'm going to tell you this, and I'll probably do a show on this. All religions, can I say all religions are false? That includes what you call camps. All religions are false. The true belief system is a personal relationship with Yahuwah through his son Yahusha in obedience to Torah. Period. Religions are man-made corruptions, especially Christianity. Christians have their creeds, but Israelites have covenant. That's why you don't never hear covenant in Christianity. They don't know nothing about covenant. They have their creeds. Religions are universal. Religions only require belief. But Yeshua said, why call me Lord, Lord, and do not what I say? Christianity is universal, not just Catholicism. That's why they call it easy believism. That's why they got billions and billions of followers when the Bible says the way is narrow and few there be that find it. Why? Because the system has continued for over 2,000 years controlling and persecuting the Israelites. Temple worship was continued. Priesthood functioned, festivals drew crowds, yet the systems were constrained by Roman power and Herodian control. This produced a setting where the forms of righteousness remained, but authority was compromised. The scriptures repeatedly framed this condition as ripe for judgment and restoration. Why? Because Rome ruled, Israel still practiced their quote-unquote religion, but did not have self-determination. And their leaderships fell under the pagan manipulations of the Romans. And that's why you see when they say, who do you want, Yeshua or Barabbas? And they chose Barabbas. It was the elite. It wasn't the common man. You can't say it was the Israelites that rejected the Messiah. It was the elite. They try to paint the whole nation as that. But here's the thing. According to the scriptures, we punish for the sins of our forefathers. So whether they were released or not, everybody got taken out. Jerusalem's isolation meant survival dependent on Roman-controlled grain, roads, and security. That stripped the city of leverage. When dependence peaks and legitimacy collapses, prophetic confrontation carries maximum force. The message could not be dismissed as foreign invasion. It emerged from inside the system Rome thought it controlled. Once again, it was the first building of this system, right? That system started with Alexander. The Greek administration, the Greek thought, philosophy, languages that Rome built their system on. Rome built their system on Greek culture, Greek knowledge, Greek language, which the Greek learns from the Egyptians. And it just so happens they all want to enslave the Israelites. Why them? Why then, not earlier or later? Earlier, Israel still had degrees of sovereignty. Later, the temple will be gone. Only under Herod did covenant structures exist while true authority was absent. So the question is, why did the Messiah come at that time? So Messiah appears when kingship exists without legitimacy. Herod sitting in the throne, not an Israelite. Worship exists without freedom. You could go to the temple, but you got to pay taxes to Caesar. Law exists without justice. The laws are there, but they're not enforced according to Torah. Why? Because Herod's ruling for Rome. Peace exists without sovereignty. The peace exists by the sword of Rome. They maintain order, not through grace and mercy and adhering to Torah. Herod provided the visible throne. Rome provided the pressure. The moment exposed the need for a higher kingship. Lord, will you at this time restore the kingdom to Israel? Yeshua said, I come but for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. It's time to set my people free. The reason these things are happening to them is because they fell away from the faith. The reason these things are happening to them is because they rejected my law, statutes, and commandments. So now I'm going to come in and pay the price for their sins so they can be restored. And the Father will be pleased with the sacrifice of his Son and forgive their sins, and therefore, in the process of time, restore the kingdom to Israel. Lord, will you at this time restore the kingdom to Israel? Well, it's not for me to tell you, but it's for the Father. Messiah, will you restore Israel? When the apostles asked Yahushua, will you at this time restore the kingdom to Israel? They were not asking a vague spiritual question. They were asking a concrete political question shaped by Roman control and Herodian collapse. Can you imagine today? Messiah come today. Similar situation. We're ruled through proxy, even though we're in the land of our captivity. But we think we're free. We got a figurehead who was an Edomite, but we were familiar with the Edomites. We got a figurehead who's ruling Jerusalem, but it's really wrong. It's the same thing today. There's a figurehead who's ruling the world, but it's not the Most High. But who's supposed to rule? His people. Oh, they don't like to hear that. Who's supposed to rule? The Israelites, the Yeshua, Ezra Alawi. But Rome rules. This is why the Most High says he's bringing us back and he's going to restore us. We got to become a nation again. Can you see what's happening on the continent right now? It's all prophetic. Ready to take off the chains of Rome. But a lot of people being deceived today because they don't know no better. Herod fails. They had just watched a Roman-approved ruler fail. Herod ruled with Roman backing. His dynasty exposed what imperial peace actually meant. Order without sovereignty. That's what we have today, right? Order without sovereignty. We don't have no sovereignty. We can't do what we want. The apostles lived inside the system. Can we say the matrix? They saw taxation, military oversight, and governors. Can we say the matrix? They knew what restoration would have to undo. Their question assumed a real kingdom had been taken and could be returned. Lord, will you at this time restore the kingdom to Israel? Or master. I know y'all like that better than Lord. He's not our legitimate king. 92% said he doesn't represent us. Who said that? Where's that number come from? I don't see it in the Bible. Rome controlled Israel. The temple still stood. The priesthood still operated. The land still existed. What was missing was authority. Rome ruled from outside. Client rulers ruled from above. That created a visible gap between covenant identity and political reality. The apostles were asking whether Yahushua was about to close that gap. Yahushua said, not the time yet. Y'all got to go into captivity, you know. Y'all going to be dispersed amongst the nations as slaves. Then I'm going to have to restore you and bring you back. Messiah's resurrection. Execution was Rome's final word. Resurrection nullified it. From the apostles' point of view, if Rome could not kill him, Rome could not stop him. The logical next step was regime change. Lord, will you at this time restore the kingdom to Israel? Same old, same old. Indirect rule as the core method. The Roman Empire ruled by surrounding, regulating, and deleting. Oh, delegating. I'm sorry, delegating. Deleting too, though. Rome absorbed regions around a target first, then installed client kings, governors, and councils to manage daily life. France and other Western powers repeated this during the scramble for Africa. They rarely ruled by constant occupation alone. They ruled by appointing local intermediaries, redefining borders, and making those intermediaries dependent on imperial backing. The face was local, the authority was external. Now, the question is, once again, how do we get our rulership back? We got to take it. We got to take it. Can somebody say Sahel Alliance? Can we say somebody got to kick out the raccoons? Can somebody say we got to kick out the Tanubus and the Rutos? Rutos? Control of life, control of movement, not just territory. Rome controlled roads, ports, grain routes, and customs. Control of flow equal control of life. Colonial powers did the same with railways, ports, and shipping lanes, channeling raw materials outward and finished goods inward. Today, the levers are trade, regimes, debt, logistics, hubs, and digital infrastructure. The mechanism is identical. Whoever controls movement controls outcomes. Same old, same old. Revenue extraction. Revenue extraction without sovereignty. Rome taxed provinces while denying them real political voice. Colonial administrations extracted labor and resources while excluding Africans from decision-making. Today, extraction continues through unequal trade terms, currency pegs, debt service, and licensing regimes. The names changed, the imbalance did not. Rome still ruling. Local elites. Rome preferred local rulers because they absorbed anger and kept order. Colonial governments elevated chiefs, kings, and councils that answered upward, not outward. Modern systems rely on aligned political classes, security forces, and technocrats whose survival depends on external approval. This buffers the center from revolt and localizes blame. So most people not overthrowing because now they got an African as the leader. South Africans ain't doing nothing about the imbalance, even though white folks still control most of the land and the money in South Africa because they got a black face. Same thing happened during the time Rome occupied and controlled East Africa, which was inclusive of Jerusalem. Law tool of compliance. Roman law standardized administration and justified enforcement. Colonial law redefined land ownership, labor obligations, and legality. Modern international law, sanctions, and compliance frameworks perform the same function. Law follows power, it rarely restrains it. If we learn this, Ramaphosa, if we learn this, we will understand how they're working against us and how to overcome them. It's the same game. It's the same game. And guess what? They play this game on a not only a local level in terms of a nation, but on a local level in terms of social. We can look at it as influencers, right? Getting money to influence us to do things and to think a certain way and to be pretendians and to be FBAs and to be ADOS, which causes separation and division. So they keep us divided because a divided nation cannot come together to overthrow the power structure. Same old, same old. That's why I keep telling y'all, we in the mess. And this deception and control has been going on for over 2,000 years. What changed and did not change? What actually changed? The optics improved, the rhetoric softened, the intermediaries became more local. What did not change was external control over borders, resources, money, and movement, right? Indirect rule through dependent elites. Distance governance that avoids accountability. Rome called it order, France called it civilization. Today it's called partnership, stability, and development. The structure is the same. Our people don't get it though. Why? Because my people perish for lack of knowledge. I'm not going to get on that FBA discussion right now. But basically, in my opinion, eat the meat, spit out the bone. FBA is nothing but anti-African. That's my opinion. Forget all the reparations talk and we got to get ours first. Y'all anti-African, which means you all are anti-unity. That's my opinion. Y'all anti putting the two sticks together. You could be FBA and Judah, because Judah is a ethnicity. Okay? You could be FBA because FBA is a belief system. You could be both. But you're still contrary to unity. Conclusion. Rome did not conquer Egypt and Jerusalem by storming sacred grounds first. Rome won by taking the systems that made both places live. When Egypt fell under Roman control, the decisive prize was not temples or cities. The prize was the Nile. Control of the Nile meant control of grain, taxation, transport, and timing. Rome converted Egypt into an imperial engine, managed directly by prefects, loyal to Augustus, not by the Senate. Egypt became Rome's private granary. From that moment, any region depending on the Nile, linked trade, or food moved within Roman reach. Same old, same old. Jerusalem followed a different path but ended at the same result. Rome isolated it by absorbing everything around it. Egypt to the south, Syria to the north, Arabia to the east, ports to the west. Once isolation was complete, Rome ruled Jerusalem without ruling it openly. Food, pilgrims, taxes, security flowed through Roman hands. Sacred status did not interrupt logistics, it merely mass dependency. Rome installed a hinge figure. Herod the Great ruled locally, but his authority flowed from Rome upwards. Not from the people outward, he enforced Roman interests through local law, local taxation, and local institutions. Rome stayed distant. Herod absorbed the pressure. The result was an illusion of autonomy. The temple stood, kingship existed, ritual continued. But sovereignty was gone. Egypt fed the empire. Jerusalem depended on it. Rome did not need to occupy either place heavily or permanently. By owning the Nile, Rome controlled the supply. By surrounding Jerusalem, Rome controlled survival. What looked like peace was managed dependence. That's what's happening today. It's managed dependence. That is how Rome ruled, not by destroying the sacred at first, but rendering it powerless. Now, it makes sense that Rome controlling access to the life source of the surrounding area, which is the Nile. And they control fertile land in the delta to grow their crops. Now, Rome had a base, as I mentioned, right? In Elephantine Island. Now, why would Rome have a base here in the Nile to control transport and access to the water system and the trade routes? Why set it up here if Israel is over here and you want to control Israel? Israel wasn't getting their water from over here in the Nile. Their water came from over here, underground aquifers and the supposed Sea of Galilee. Why was Rome controlling Egypt and all of the Nile? And their interest was to collect taxes from people who were called troglodytes in this area. And collecting taxes from people in this area but the big important place was over here because a lot of people was coming over here to do what? Pilgrimage and sacrifices. When they didn't even have enough water to clear out the animal sacrifices. But this makes 100% sense. He who controls the Nile controls life. He who controls the Nile controls money. He who controls the Nile controls food. He who controls the Nile don't need a standing army to always hold down rebellious populations. Why? Because they control your access to food. They control your access to the water. You got to pay tribute. They just need to be able to handle business when you go rogue. This is the real Israel. If you do the search, if you do the research, you will find out this is accurate for the most part. This makes 100% sense. Take the time to use your cabeza. Take the time to use your mind, that brain that the Most High gave you, who's going to waste their time on this land right here? Some people say, well, they wanted to control the trade routes through Jerusalem so that they could get to Syria and Lebanon. Well, was it really that important to control this little strip of land? Remember, there was a land bridge right here where they could just walk right across. Didn't have to go through Israeli territory. Let alone any group of people that wanted to go through here could definitely defeat Israel, because Israel didn't have enough resources or people or anything in this area to do anything or to prevent anybody from passing through. Or they could have went the long way around and went through Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and come back. But controlling the Nile, that makes sense. Because you control the access to life, water, food, everything. We got to use our brains and stop falling for the foolishness and the camp logic and, the people who don't like to read and study and research and just think. I'm like, be honest with you, there's no excuse today for any ignorance. All of the information we have today, we have access to. I mean, there's really no need for us to fall for the lies, because here's the deal. We've been deceived since we were born. We were born in the matrix. Literally, almost everything we've been taught is a lie. All you got to do is look at the history. Well, you're cool, but how do you know what you're looking at is true? How do you know that those historical documents are legit? Well, all you have to do is understand how the world worked back then. Even though Rome controlled a lot of these countries and nations, there was opposing scholars. There were Christian scholars, there were Arabic scholars, there were Chinese scholars, there were other people writing on different events and different topics. And no one controlled any one nation, because it's not like today where they had control to every single piece of technology and resource. As I say, in my opinion, from my research, anything before the 1900s or really 1920s is probably accurate history for the most part. I'm not saying there aren't any modifications. Obviously there are. But they couldn't control everything. That's why you can see in many of the books that we presented on this channel that the Israelites were a black people. Ogilvy said they were black Africans. We have historical documents that admit that the Jews were black. So if they controlled all the information, why would they admit that? You got to weigh the evidence. You got to filter through and do comparisons. But they did hide a lot of stuff. They manipulated a lot of text. They manipulated a lot of history, but you got to use your brain. That's what they're going to say. Ogilvy was a Judaizer. But you really do. You have to use your brain. You got to ask the right questions. Okay? We find evidence from all of these different books, different countries, nations, some in French, that say the Africans were black Jews. But then you got camp members who say Africans are Hamites. But all Africans aren't Israelites. All Hamites are Africans, all Israelites are Africans, but they're not the same people. Why? Because Africa is a continent. And this is where people play with your brain and they deceive you. And they repeat things over and over, right? Like a mantra. Native American Indians and the Mexicans and Latinos, like the camps. They repeat it over and over and over and over and over until you start to believe it. But the true Israelites, according to history and scripture, were black. And if you read my latest book, the Book of Our Fathers, you will see that the Bible is an African book. It is an African belief system. The Bible takes place in Africa. No one can defeat it. And you know for a fact that we're on the right track, because you know why? There's a lot of Gentiles coming out admitting the truth. How long we been in this awakening, teaching these things, and the Gentiles are fighting us? Now a lot of Gentiles saying, you know what? I think the blacks, I think the Negroes, I think the Africans, Americans, I think they're the true Israelites. Why? Because we've been teaching and showing the proof. Undeniable proof. So now it's up for us to understand what's happening. Stay away from religion. Turn to Torah. Turn to Yahushua. Follow and believe in Yahushua for salvation. Obey the Torah as a light unto your path. Go against the world order. Go against unified religions. Go against the universal belief system. Go against the New Age system. Go against this unity that the world is trying to create outside of the Messiah. Then you will be on the narrow way. It's us against them. It's always been us against them. And when I say it's us against them, first is the Israelites, the Israelites. And then it's the believing Gentiles. It's those who want to believe and follow Torah and follow Yahushua 100%. It's us against them. They can't manipulate us. Why? Because we only believe Torah. We're going to celebrate the feast days. We're going to honor the Sabbath day. We're not going to eat pork. We're not going to let you stick us no more since we woke with the lollipop. We are set apart people. We are holy people. What does set apart mean? I mean, we don't have nothing to do with them. Who's them? The ones who disregard Torah. The ones who do what they want. The ones who say the law is done away with. We don't know. We don't go that way. The law says, well, Jacoba, you know, no one is saved by the keeping of the law. Never said that. Yahushua saves. The law is about obedience. If you love me, keep my commandments. Oh, well, that's the laws of Christ. Well, Yeshua said he came to do the will of his Father. He said he came not to do away with the law. Understand, this will separate us. Jubilee said that we would turn back to the laws. That's what's happening. See, while the whole world is in this deception and World War III is about to come, Israel is going to stand on the word. Let me ask y'all something right quick before I close. Did y'all see Trump said that you will not have, or more than likely will not have, sound like to me, he said you're not going to have a Christmas in 2026. Give me one if you heard Trump say you're not going to have a Christmas in 2026. I'm just saying. He said it. I didn't say it. Now, if Trump telling you there ain't going to be no Christmas in 2026, I wonder what's going to happen. You mean to tell me them Israelites were right? We living in the end times? You mean to tell me them Israelites were right? We about to have World War III? You mean to tell me there's no rapture like them Israelites keep saying? You mean there's the second Exodus? You mean them Negroes really are the chosen? You mean we gotta pay for the sins of our ancestors? If you didn't hear it, Google is your friend. I couldn't believe it when I heard it. I couldn't believe it when I heard it. But that's one thing about Trump. Trump is going to let the secret out before it's time, right? That's the thing about Trump. He going to spill the beans. He going to tell you everything. I wouldn't be surprised he'll come the next week or so or a month. Well, you know, we're going to throw you Negroes out of the country. I wouldn't be surprised he'd come and say that. We're gonna throw you Negroes out of the country. He is sort of saying that. He was talking about repatriation. Look it up. Look up. Trump was talking about repatriation. That's a code word for get the niggas out. Nah, I'm sorry. That's what he was talking about. That's why they got them troops in black towns and black cities. Y'all thought I was joking, huh, when I say we're going to flee. But, hey, we about to find out. But look, fam, if y'all want to support us, you can go to tellministry.com, click on the donations tab, Cash App, $TOTW7101. You can also like, share, and subscribe. I'm looking forward to seeing y'all in the wilderness, family. That's what I'm expecting next. That's relative, I guess. You know, I ain't got no time frame, but I think it's near. And I would say if you're not right with the Most High, get right with the Most High. Right? Because the way is narrow and few that be that find it. Everything is happening according to the scriptures. That's why if you doubt the Bible, look at the prophecies. Even the book of Revelation, you should be able to see the prophecies coming to pass today. You should be able to see the technology for the mark of the beast. You should be able to see AI as the image of the beast that speaks and causes many that does not worship it to be killed. You should see all that, even if you don't want to see the historical fulfillment in the Inquisition with the Negroes. Because if you don't believe, you're about to be deleted with the rest of the world who don't believe. Understand this, the world sits under judgment. The Bible says he's going to make men rarer than fine gold. But some people want to keep living foul and think they could do what they want to do, and judgment sits there waiting for you. But understand this. One of the main reasons I wanted to go through this historical view of Rome and how Rome came to power, and not through a mass invasion like during 70 AD, but through political intrigue and, you know, client kings or proxy kings, is because, yes, that's what's continued for over 2,000 years. That same beast system of taxes, resources, taking over people's land, taking their stuff, just like Augustus did. Ain't nothing stopped. Trump wants to take Venezuela just like Augustus took Egypt. Ain't nothing changed. Rome has continued to ride around the world, conquering and to conquer, while all the while saying peace, peace, when there is no peace. understand that America is just an extension of the Roman Empire. And they know it. And a lot of these systems and a lot of these things are continuing through secret societies, Freemasonry, fraternities and sororities, churches, synagogues, mosques, Buddhist temples. When I say they got a lock on this world, they got a lock on this world. And the only way you're going to be able to see it is that you ask the Most High to reveal it to you. Because there's few that make it. Well, fam, that's all I got. If you like what we do, please support us. And also, don't forget, go get my book. If you haven't gotten it, The Book of Our Fathers at Amazon.com. And also, if you have it, please go and give me a review. Well, fam, looking forward to 2026. This is the last video for 2025. We about to, look, I think what's going to happen is going to be, I think it's going to be similar to 2025, the way Trump kicked off 2025. Fast forward, high speed changes. That's what I think 2026 is going to be. But on a global scale of war and oppression and destruction. I know you don't want to hear it, but, you know, be prepared. Seek the Most High. Take any preparations as he leads you. And peace and blessings, Israel. Your captivity is ending. Love you with the love of Messiah. Well, family, the wait is over. The moment has arrived where truth emerges triumphant from the shadows of history. Introducing the true Jerusalem, the lost kingdoms of the Israelites, the groundbreaking work by me, Yacobe Vale, a journey into the past that reshapes the future. I cut through centuries of misconceptions with piercing clarity. This book delivers a compelling case packed with evidence that commands attention and gonna get some respect. Come with me for a second, family, and discover how these thrilling civilizations flourished, protected by towering highlands and sustained by advanced engineering. Some have asked, where is Jerusalem? Is it the land in the Middle East? I say no. It is in the highlands of Ethiopia. With hours of groundbreaking research, this book brings in a new revelation, and it will transform your understanding of African history and its connections to the ancient world. It's going to remove from your mind the conditioning by the Romans of what has really happened to our past. Come with me, family, to the Ethiopian highlands and find out why this is our land. Why things have been hidden and obfuscated for centuries. We are royalty, children of the Most High. What kind of land do you expect us to have? Dried up dirt in the Middle East, or land flowing with rivers? A land full of beautiful animals flowing with milk and honey. Don't miss out on this monumental unveiling. Grab your copy today and stand on the side of truth. Visit Amazon.com or www.tailministries.com to purchase your book and join Yacobe Vale's teachings on Tail Ministries. Family, your journey to hidden history has now begun. So family, get your copy of True Jerusalem, the Lost Kingdoms of the Israelites today. Journey into the heart of Africa, where history and legend converge to reveal the forgotten kingdoms of the Israelites and the true location of Jerusalem.